and don'ts of goat care, which will cover how to choose your goat, transportation, quarantine, housing, feed, water, fencing, and stocking rates. Why do you actually want to have goats? Is it for the meat? Is it for the dairy to make cheese, yogurt, or milk? Fibre to harvest the cashmere or mohair? Or are they miniatures? Is it a hobby stud and showing or commercial? You want to look at what your markets are. Where are they around you? Are you looking at the domestic market, a niche farmer market, or export? Are you looking to breed and on-sell livestock, or is it just for breed management and enjoyment on your property? Are you looking at does, wethers, or bucks? Goats are a herd animal, not a solo animal. So you really need to ensure that you've got the area to have 2 or more, and they can be quite addictive. You want to see what your long-term goals are. Breed associations have set standards for does and bucks with respect to height, conformation, and other traits, and you can also use their guidelines when looking at purchasing new goats. But basically, when choosing a new buck, the aspects I consider are the 7 T's. Teeth, as in age, looking for over or undershot jaws. Torso, as in body condition. Are we overly fat or are we in good paddock condition? Toes, how often will they require trimming considering your land terrain? Tossle, has he ever had a history of urinary calculi? Any deviations or lesions? Testicles, make sure there are 2. Of a relatively even size and no unusual lumps and bumps. Teats, male teat structure will have an effect on what his progeny have, and in the long run, you want does that can rear kids with no hassles. And temperament, you want an animal that you can handle and work safely around. Other aspects you would look at in a buck, depending on the breed, are milk production aspects of its dam, fibre diameter, growth rates, and horn set if not polled or disbudded. When breeding, with each kidding, you want to improve your livestock and get further towards your long-term goals. When you've decided on your goat or goats, you also need to consider how you're going to transport them. Are you going to do it yourself, or are you going to get a contract to do it? If it is a long way and if buying from interstate, have you checked whether you need interstate crossing papers? There are rules as to the stocking density of goats within a transport trailer and the time off feed and water, both prior and during transportation, depending on the age of the goats, their size and their pregnancy status. You also need to consider the elements as in wind, rain and sun, and preferably have the front of the trailer enclosed to provide a wind buffer. It is recommended to quarantine your goats for 30 days prior to introducing them to your herd. This is so that you can test for diseases like JD and CAE. JD and CAE are both notifiable diseases in Victoria. Both diseases have long-term production and welfare issues. Being a notifiable disease means that you, your vet, and the laboratory need to notify Agriculture Victoria when you suspect or have the disease, and it is advisable as selling goats to other producers that you inform them fully in writing using a goat health declaration. Johne's disease is caused by a bacteria that is spread by feces. Basically, it causes thickening of the intestinal lining so that the animal can't absorb its own food, and so it starts to utilise its fat and muscle reserves. It is also known as a chronic wasting disease. Goats can get both the sheep and cattle strains of Johne's disease, and there is no known cure. There is a vaccine that over time, with other management practices, will reduce the bacterial load on your property, but in the long run, it is better not to have the disease in your livestock. CAE, known as caprine arthritis encephalitis, and also known as big knee, is a virus that is spread mainly by colostrum, milk, and saliva. It can cause arthritis, mastitis, pneumonia, and encephalomyelitis in kids. There is no known cure. but with hygienic management and testing and culling of positive goats, the disease can be controlled, managed and eradicated from your property. The 30 days gives you time to test and treat for worms and then retest after worming to make sure that the drench worked if required. Enables to check for external parasites and give treatments for lice if needed, to trim toes and check for foot rot, to check the coat for weed seeds and allow the seeds to pass through the intestinal tract, and it allows the animal to adjust to you, your feed and your climate, as any change in feed can take up to 10 days for the microbes in the rumen to adjust over. Housing depends on your number, your location, climate and the type of goats. If intensively run, there are rules on the minimum space allowed for lounging, exercise and feed, and water trough dimensions and access. But if you're a small producer, consider whether you want a permanent or movable structure. How easy will it be to remove spoiled and contaminated bedding material? Can it be disinfected if you get an issue with coccidiosis or an intestinal bacterial infection? Does it need to be fox or dog proof? And will you need to segregate your goats within it during kidding times or inclement weather? Tethering can be done, but it is regarded as a temporary method of restraint and is not suitable for long-term confinement. And goats need to be released from their tether daily for exercise. Goats under 6 months of age should not be tethered, and there are rules on the type and length of tethers, the need to train an animal to be tethered, how often you need to inspect them, and the provision of food, water and shelter. There are risks of not being able to escape from dogs, tipping over water containers and dehydrating in hot weather, and getting entangled within the tether. It can be done, but there needs to be at least twice daily inspections and a high level of care. Goats eat on average 3.5% of their body weight a day in dry matter, but it really depends on whether they are growing, pregnant or lactating as to the quality and the protein and the energy content of the provided feed that is required. You need to understand what plants in your paddock can be toxic to goats and consider what mix of pastures and forage you can grow, as goats are more of a browser than a grazer. Be careful of garden prunings, as that is where the majority of poisonings tend to occur in Victoria, from well-meaning family members or neighbours throwing branches and cuttings over the fence, not realising that a lot of your common garden plants can be toxic to goats. If hard feeding, make sure that goats cannot get their horns or feet entrapped within the feeder. Position it so they can't spoil it by defecating or lying in it. When providing ad-lib hay, if in a high rainfall area, also ensure it can't become wet and get mouldy. There are a number of goat-specific lick blocks or loose licks available. The blocks usually have molasses as a binder for the attractant, and the loose licks have salt as an attractant and limiter. Whether you choose a block or a loose lick depends on what is available to you and whether you want an all-purpose one or are trying to treat a deficiency that is in your area, like iodine deficiency, which can cause goiter in kids. The main thing is to provide them ad lib, record the use by dates and replenish as required. Your goats may not touch them for a couple of months, but then you may have a pasture growth or drying off in the paddock and you will notice them access your mineral station more often. With water, goats in hot weather can drink more than 12 litres of water a day. It is preferable to provide water in a stock trough, as then you have more control over its provision and cleanliness, and you won't get goats getting stuck in the mud trying to access it. Water troughs need to be able to be easily cleaned out, be of a depth or being replenished often enough that the water is not too tepid. Be careful of using old bathtubs, as whilst they are a good depth for a hobby farm, there is the potential for lead to leach out into the water and contaminate your goats. Kids that are a couple of days old will mimic and copy their mother and drink water, but you need to provide it in a container that kids can easily reach and easily get out of if they inadvertently topple in. And if you're on bore or river water, it may be worth getting your water tested for its salt, mineral and metal content levels, especially if you have wethers as pets or as selling meat, milk and cheese products. With fencing, they say if water can get through a fence, so will a goat. Some goats climb or jump over, some go under, or some go through. And the grass always seems greener on the other side. A lot of the time you have to work with your neighbours regarding the type of fencing you have. In Victoria, the Fences Act covers who pays for a dividing fence, the type of fence that can be built, how to give notices, and how to resolve disputes. Your livestock need to be kept on your property and not allowed to stray, to eat the neighbour's crops or cause an accident on the road. But you also don't want your neighbour's livestock straying onto your place, eating your feed and potentially bringing diseases and weed seeds onto your place. If you can train them to an electric outrigger on your fence, then that will decrease the chance of them getting their head stuck in the fence. Also, consider the type of end stays you're putting in, as you don't want to provide them with easy access to go over the fence. And remember, there are rules about electric fencing and the required signage where there may be public access. If using electric outriggers, it is recommended to provide either an internal length of chicken mesh fence or some other comfortable scratching rubbing surface so that they can get rid of their winter coats unless they are pets or show goats and you're giving them regular brushes or clipping them. Now, there have just been a few highlighted questions come up. Other apps to formulate a balanced ration. There are some, Meat Livestock Australia, I believe, has got a good feed app to look at cost of ration and everything else like that. Salinity level, should chop it off. Salinity level. That is one of the biggest things. You need to get your water tested for its salinity level if you are on a river or bore, because they won't drink if the water's too salty. You'd have to look at what sort of salts they were, whether is it just salt or is it the mineral salt that's causing the problem as well. I haven't got the figures straight in front of me, but they are available online. Moving on. With stocking rates, your stocking rate depends on your land terrain, your annual rainfall, whether your pastures are improved or unimproved, at what age you are turning your kids off, and how much labour, chemical treatments and supplementary feeding you are prepared to provide. Research by Dr. Bruce McGregor has shown that 8 DSC, a DSC is a dry sheep equivalent, per hectare is ideal for minimising internal parasitism. So an adult doe who rears her kids to 12 months of age is seen as 3 DSC. So a 30-acre property could potentially sustain 30-odd does, taking into consideration laneways, watering points and shelters. The biggest consideration is that pasture is potentially the cheapest feed you'll ever grow, so you don't want that eaten out so that you get erosion and lose all your topsoil. And for worm control, it is preferable if pasture is taller than 7 to 10 centimetres. If you have only recently purchased your property, it is probably best if you start out with a small herd so that you can see what your seasons are like, when your best growing times are, and where the goats are for you. There are a lot of resources out there. MLA has a Going Into Goat guide with different modules on aspects of goat farming and has quite a few good goat videos. Most textbooks are either in English or they're American. There are a few Australian ones, but with any text I would recommend borrowing it through your library first to see if it suits you and your goats. Find out who in your area has goats, if there is a local goat club, and attend goat shows to meet other knowledgeable goat breeders.